Of an introduction is there's no single text that it's easy to study this subject from. So we can look at it from the perspective of the Torah Shebichtav and study the Chumash, Parashat Acharemot, which is actually the reading for Yom Kippur. We can also read it from the Mishnayot. We can also read it from the Machzor. No matter how you approach it, the picture is somewhat incomplete, okay? Which is one of the challenges of studying the subject. There's no single text that is exhaustive in its presentation of all the details, and any text that is exhaustive, like let's say the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, it's so deep, it's so long that it would be impossible to fit into one shiur to kind of give an overview. So you might want to look at a Machzor, you might want to look at the Chumash. We're going to do a little bit of a combination of the two because there's no easy way to jump into it. Because because the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, gives us much of the detail, but not all of it, and then the Mishnayot give us a lot of the other details, and then really there's we read the description of the Avodah in the Musaf repetition on Yom Kippur, and the Musaf repetition on Yom Kippur is built on there are actually two piyutim that were written summarizing the Avodah of Yom Kippur. One is called Amitz Koach, which is read by the Ashkenazim, and even some Ashkenazim don't read it because it's got all kinds of inaccuracies in its description of the way that it was actually done. And then there's a Takonanta, which is the one that we read, and that many Ashkenazim who are purists also read because they want to read the, so to speak, the correct Seder Avodah. In any case, if you have a machzor, if you happen to have a machzor, the place in this particular machzor to look is on page 640 is where it starts in our machzorim that we're using. The difficulty with trying to learn the Seder Avodah from the machzor is that in the machzor it's written in a poem. So it's so every line is poetically, it goes in alphabetical order, and it's sometimes difficult to see the forest for the trees, as you might say. So that's why it was hard to select what text we should use. So in order to simplify it even further, before we even go into the text, I'm going to give you a very simplistic introduction to what happens in Avodat Yom Kippurim in the Beit HaMikdash. And then we're going to look at the psukim, but I'll give you kind of an overview. It seems much more complicated than it actually is. Okay, it's really not as complicated as it seems. Obviously, there's an entire tractate, a Masechet of the Talmud that deals with Avodat Yom Kippurim. If you look at Masechet Yoma, which deals with Yom Kippur, only the last chapter really deals with Yom Kippur as we observe it today. The first 7 chapters deal all with the Avodah, they deal all with the service. But essentially it goes like this. You have every day of the year what's called the Korban Tamid. You have the regular service, the Tamidin. You have the morning Tamid and you have the afternoon Tamid. And everything that comes along with that regular service of the Tamid. On every special day, Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh or holiday, you have a Musaf. And this musaf is usually just some additional animals that are offered on top of what's offered in the Tamidin. That's basically what it is. On Shabbat we know that Uviyom Shabbat shenei kivasim b'nei shana temimim. It's an extra 2 kivasim that are offered on Shabbat. On the other holidays it's more complicated. Some have 7. There's all different numbers and different formulas for the various holidays. So those are the Musafin. So you have Tamidin and Musafin. And you have those on Yom Kippur too. Because Yom Kippur is, number 1, a regular day. So it has to have the Tamidin. It's number 2, a special day. It's one on the list of special days. So therefore it has the Korban Musaf. And then what it has on top of that is Avodat Yom Kippurim. So what ends up happening is, first of all, we have to figure out how the Avodat Yom Kippurim works, and second of all, we have to figure out exactly how to fit it into the regular schedule. Because now we have a whole different schedule of offerings that have to be done, and they're unusual, they're different than the typical ones, and they have to be integrated somehow with the regular program. So a lot of what needs to be understood in the more in the complexities and the nuances of the Avodah is how to integrate the Avodah of Yom Kippur into the regular framework of temple service. We're not going to get into that. What we want to focus on is the particular Avodah of Yom Kippur. Okay? We're not going to get into what is done on Yom Kippur that's actually done every day of the year. What's done on Yom Kippur that is just because it's a special day and requires a musaf. We're going to focus our sights on what happens on Yom Kippur that is unique, absolutely unique to Yom Kippur. Okay? And I'm going to give you a rundown of it. It's really much simpler than you might imagine. So the Torah tells us this. For Aharon not to come any old time into the Kodesh HaKodashim, unless he brings par ben bakar lechatat va'ay le'olah. So you already have two sacrifices. What are they? Par ben bakar lechatat. It's a bull for a sin offering. This is in Acharemot. This is on page 636. The first 34 Pesukim of Parashat Acharemot are dedicated to this. This is what we read in the morning of Yom Kippur. And a burnt offering, an ayel le'olah. So you have a sin offering and a burnt offering, a bull and a ram, brought by whom? By the Kohen Gadol. By the Kohen Gadol only. This is the Kohen Gadol's offering. And then he has to wear white clothing. We know he has to wear the special white clothing. And it says that then in addition to the offerings he has to bring, on page 638 it says, Ume'et adat b'nei Yisrael yikach, shenei se'irei izim lechatat, v'ayel echad le'olah. Then there are three additional offerings that the Jewish people are going to bring on this day, which are the 2 se'irim, 2 goats, and 1 ram. The Rambam says that there are 15 korbanot offered on Yom Kippur in total. Correct? 15 animals are offered on Yom Kippur, but that includes the musafin, that includes the tzmidin, and that includes these. Okay? Now, the order of the service is where things become unusual. Okay, so for a moment, let's just focus on what the psukim say. So we know what our korbanot are that we have to deal with. We have extra here, a bull of the Kohen Gadol, and a ram of the Kohen Gadol. And we have extra 2 goats, and a ram of the people. Okay? That's what we have. Now, the Kohen Gadol is going to come, and it says, V'hikriv Aharon et parachatata shelo, v'chiper ba'ado v'ad beto. This is Pasuk Vav, verse number 6. Aharon will bring close the sin offering that belongs to him, and he will atone for himself and for his household. Now, what does that sound like it means that he did? What did he do? It sounds like he brought the korban, does it not? That's what it sounds like, correct? It says that he brings the sacrifice and he atones, right? The only problem is we're going to see in a moment that this animal is apparently still alive. So it was not yet what the piyut tells us. If we look at how it's described, and by the way, if you learn something really great to do is to read the Mishnayot of Yomah, because if you know the Mishnah, what we read on Yom Kippur Day in the Musaf is just a poetic adaptation of the order of the Mishnah. It's practically like, a lot of it is word for word even, just put into poetic terms. So what happens? Actually, the Kohen Gadol only says a vidui on this bull. He takes this bull that's his sin offering, and he says a vidui for himself and his family. He says a confession. But he doesn't do anything else. And when he says the confession, what happens? Huh?
Then it's v'chiper.
Well, that's called v'chiper. There's some level of kapara, some level of atonement. But does anybody remember what occurs when he says this? When he says this confession? Does anybody remember? Something really dramatic that only happens on Yom Kippur. He uses the name of Hashem, the real name of Hashem, the 4-letter special name of Hashem. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in the vidui that he says. And everybody falls on their face and says, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Shalom Bayit. Okay? So this is the first of the set of viduyim that he does. The first confession that he does is on his personal part. And everybody falls down, V'ha'kohanim v'ha'am, u'medim ba'azara, etc. Next, but he doesn't kill the bull yet. The bull is still alive.
Everyone else is just listening, right?
Everybody's listening, and when they hear the name of Hashem, they all fall on the ground and say, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, which is what we imitate during the Avodah as well, right? We're imitating. What happens next? He goes over to the two Se'irim, the two goats. And most of the time when you want to bring a korban, you have to designate a korban with intention. You have to take the korban and say, I want this to be a burnt offering. I want this to be a sin offering. I want this to be whatever. Here he doesn't do that. How does he designate the two? How does he decide which goat is going to be the korban? Goralot. He uses a lottery. Now the lottery is not, you don't buy a ticket for this lottery. The way that it works is that they had two cards. One said for Hashem. Okay, one says for Azazel. You put them into a box. You put your two hands in the box. And you take them out as you're standing in front of the goats. One goat is to your right, one goat is to your left. You look and see which one has Lashem on it. Okay, whichever one says for Hashem, that's the one that's going to be a korban. The one that's for Azazel is the one that's going to... in the end, they both end up in the same place, which is, they both end up dead, but... one of them has a more gruesome ending maybe than the other one. One of them gets a more noble and glorious, gets to become a korban. But in the ultimate scheme of things, they both end up dead. So the lottery designates these two goats. And again, when the Kohen Gadol designates the goat that's going to be the korban, what does he do? What happens then? Something again very melodramatic and exciting, which is he doesn't say Ladonai, like we would say, but he says La, whatever the name is that we don't say, right? And everybody hears it, and everybody falls on their face and says Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed again. Then the Kohen Gadol comes back to his original bull, and he again does a vidui on the original bull, and this time the vidui is not only for him but for all of the Kohanim. And again, he uses the name of Hashem, the real genuine name of Hashem, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And when the people hear it, they fall on their face again. So far, we've seen that the Kohen Gadol, there are a couple of unusual phenomena that we notice here. First of all, we have this intertwining of confessions. Why does the Kohen Gadol say a confession on the bull, then go say a confession on the goat, or not say, then designate the goat, then come back and say another confession on the bull? Just get everything done in one shot.
The same bull?
Yeah, it's the same one. He already said a confession once on this bull. The bull's like, hey, maybe it's my lucky day. He's having second thoughts. He almost killed me, he left, he came back, please. The bull is also observing Yom Kippur, hoping that he's going to be spared, right? And because he sees the guy go away, he says, Baruch Hashem, I'm going to be all right. Then the Kohen Gadol comes back and he realizes, he wasn't so lucky. So, when the Kohen Gadol again says the vidui, this time he, in fact, does shechita on the par, which is why if you look at Pasuk Yud Aleph, it says V'kriva Haron et parachatata shelo v'chiper ba'ado v'ad beto v'shachat et parachatata shelo. It says he brings close the par, and this time he actually slaughters it. In other words, this time he says another vidui. So now you see that it was still alive, because it's only now that he actually slaughters the bull. So he did something unusual. He went to the bull. Now you're going to tell me, Rabbi, what is all of this gobbledygook? Anyway, but we'll see in a second. So he goes to his bull. He says the vidui. He leaves it. He goes over to the goat. He designates the goat. He comes back to the bull. Very non-economical, not very efficient, right? Seemingly. And now he slaughters the bull. And now, just to make it worse, what would you normally do when you slaughter a bull? Now there's something really strange, and you'll notice it throughout the Avodah, if you're reading it in English or if you understand in the Hebrew, that the Kohen Gadol has to do everything on Yom Kippur. Everything. So that means he has to both slaughter the animal and also receive the blood in the cup, in the container. That's not so easy. And he has to do everything with his right hand, which is, again, you can only use your right hand for one of those two operations. So what he does is, he does the minimum amount of shechita, somebody else takes over, and he grabs the thing to catch the blood in it, because he has to do that too. He has to do everything. Okay? The Kohen Gadol has to do everything. Now, when the Kohen Gadol catches the blood, so what would you think he's going to do with the blood now? What would make sense? Let's go sprinkle some blood. That's what you do with blood in the Beit HaMikdash, right? He doesn't do that. he says to somebody else, listen, you stir this blood so that it doesn't coagulate and become hard. I have something else to do now. What do I have to do now? I have to go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And in order to go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, it's a whole big, again, very, very complex avodah, because he has to be doing everything, more or less, everything essential to the avodah he has to do, so it's very complex. But essentially they take fire off of the outer altar. There's an outer altar. There's 3 sections of the Beit HaMikdash. There's something called the Chatzer. It was called the Chatzer when they were in the Midbar. Now we call it the Azara, the courtyard. The unroofed part, the part that does not have a roof. When you look at a picture of the Beit HaMikdash, that's called the Chatzer or the Azara, the courtyard. There's a Mizbeach out there that would have the animal sacrifices. Then you have what's called you have the part that's enclosed. Inside the part that's enclosed, there are 2 levels. There's what's called the Kodesh, which they would go into every day. And that had the golden altar for the Ketoret, and it had the table with the 12 breads on it, and it had the menorah. It had 3 beautiful golden things. And then inside there is where they never go, which is the Kodesh HaKodeshim, which only has the Aron. And in the second Beit HaMikdash, they didn't even have that. They just had what's called the Even Shtiyah, which is the foundation stone. So, in any case, the Kohen Gadol now gets the Ketoret, which we know on Erev Yom Kippur, Machzirin oto be'erev Yom HaKippurim. Right, we read that every day in the Ketoret twice. Right, they returned it to the grinder on Erev Yom HaKippurim, Kedei lekayem mitzvat daka min hadaka, for those of you who are reading the Ketoret, right? So that it would be especially finely ground on Erev Yom Kippur, because it says it has to be Ketoret samim daka, even more finely ground than usual. Okay, he has to take a handful of it and put it in a pan. Then he has to go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim while he's holding both the fire pan and also the pan that has the Ketoret, and he has to, without putting it down, put the Ketoret back into his hands from the pan. So he would either hold it with his teeth, or he would hold it with his, he would tilt it back onto himself, and he had to be careful not to lose it, because it could go everywhere, all over him or all over the floor, and that wouldn't be not very bad. So he has to. It's a very, very complicated. And then he puts it on the machta, he puts it on the fire inside. Now, as soon as the place fills up with smoke, now he can go out again.
Yes,
and what is he going to do now? That bull blood is waiting for me out there. Okay, so he goes and he takes the bull blood. I'm just giving you the overview now. We're going to get into what does this all mean in a second, okay? Because it seems very staggered, very, unnecessarily complex. It would have been easier to take care of one thing at a time. He goes out, he gets the bull blood, and he sprinkles it first inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And then he says, oh, wait a second, there's something else I need to do. What else does he need to do?
You have to sprinkle where the ramp is.
But he's not even up to that yet. What else does he have to do? In addition to the sprinkling of the bull's blood, what about the sa'ir? What about that other goat the sa'ir l'Hashem, the one that goes to Hashem, is a korban, right? So that sa'ir that has to go and be brought inside, he says, oh, wait a second, I need to go slaughter that now. Wait a second, finish with the bull blood. What's the...
He's changing his clothes the whole time.
No, this time he doesn't change. He changes, when he comes in, he starts out in Bigdei Zahav, regular Kohen Gadol clothing, for the morning, because the morning is when he's doing all the regular stuff that he does every day. Then he switches into the white garments for all of this, because this is the special Avodah Yom Kippur. Then he's going to switch out of it eventually, and then switch back. But he switches 5 times. So he has to now go, after he places the Ketoret, and after he applies the blood of the par, now he has to go and get the chatat, the sa'ir. He slaughters that one, and then he goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim again with the goat's blood. Now wait, there were at least 2 ways easier than this to do this, right? He either could have slaughtered both of them now, and brought them both into the Kodesh HaKodeshim at the same time, or he could have waited to slaughter them both after he went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and come in with them at the same time. Why does he have to do it? That one was slaughtered before and is being stirred. He only does one application of that blood, and then he goes and slaughters the other one right in the middle. It's a strange way of doing things. It doesn't seem to follow logic. So then he brings the goat blood in. The goat represents that is the offering for all of the Jewish people, not just for him, right? The bull was for the Kohen Gadol and his family and the Kohanim. Now he's bringing for everybody the goat. Then he comes out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim and he's in that place called the Kodesh, right? What's in front of him, if he's facing the Kodesh HaKodeshim, is something called the Parochet. He has the curtain in front of him, right? Now that curtain, he also sprinkles. But he sprinkles first the blood of the bull, then the blood of the goat. Now, and does anybody remember how he sprinkles? Achat bi'achat, achat v'shtayim, achat v'shalosh, achat v'arba, achat v'chamesh, achat v'shesh, achat v'sheva. Right? And it says, V'lo haya mitkaven, lo lemala v'lo lemata, ela kematzlif. So what it means is, he did this. He didn't actually spritz. I don't know a better word than spritzing, you know? It's a good word. You know, the blood on the kaporet of the Aron. He didn't actually put it on the parochet. It went on the ground, actually. But what it meant was, he would dip his finger in the blood and hold his hand like upwards, that it would drip on the ground. That's lemala. Lemata means that he holds his hand downwards. That's lemata, that he holds his hand downwards. And actually on the ground you would see a drop here, 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 in a line. That's what it means kematzlif. Kematzlif means like a whip. So when you whip somebody, I've never done this before, but apparently, when you whip somebody, you start higher up on their back, and then when that gets raw, you know, you go down to the next spot, and then you go down to the next spot. So it's like the reverse of a massage, I guess. You know, it's like a massage you wouldn't want to have. So you're whipping the person, it goes like that. So that's what it means kematzlif, by the way. So if anyone was ever wondering, what does that mean? That's what it means. And when it says lemala lemata, it means he doesn't try to. When it says lemala, it doesn't mean on top of the aron and then under it. It means it's all going on the ground. They don't want to dirty the aron with the blood, or to dirty the parochet with blood, red stains. What they did was, it would go on the ground. So then you take all the blood of the sa'ir and of the par, and you mix it all together into one mixture, and then you would go and you would apply it to the four corners of that golden altar inside the Kodesh. And then they would clear off the top, because it always had ashes from the ketoret that was burned there every day, and they would put it on the top also. The 7 applications on the top. So 4 around the corner, and 7 on the top. And then he goes out, and he has to deal with the Se'ir La'azazel. We know what happens to the poor Se'ir La'azazel, right? It thinks it's going for a walk. Little does it know, it's a very long walk, first of all, and it ends up being like, there was that case in the news of that couple that they went on something and the spouse pushed his spouse over the cliff or something like that. That's pretty much what happens. You push the goat backwards over the cliff. It's very a gruesome type of ending. But before that, of course, he does a vidui again. One more vidui, where again he mentions Hashem's name 3 times in the vidui. So you have a total of 10 mentions of Shema Meforash. Just like you have a total of 10 times Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, 10 times that the Kohen Gadol switches clothes and washes his hands. So you have 10 times that the name of Hashem is mentioned, and then because there's 3 in each of the 3 viduyim, plus the 1 time when he designates the chatat, for a total of 10. When you put, and then he gets pushed, somebody else, ish iti, some other person, not the Kohen Gadol, is responsible for taking it out. While he takes it out, the Kohen Gadol deals with some details related to those 2 sacrifices, the bull and the sa'ir, and then he reads the Torah. And he doesn't have to be in the white, he's not in the white clothing anymore. He switches out of the white clothing into the regular Kohen Gadol clothing, and then he reads the Torah. And then pretty much the rest of the service, now he has to deal with the rest of some more of the daily service, some more of the musaf. And then finally he has to go in. The most interesting thing is he has to go in to retrieve the fire pan that he left inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So he actually has to wash his hands and feet, undress, go to the mikveh, come out, change back into the white special Yom Kippur garments again, wash his hands and feet again, just to go inside to get the fire pen of the Ketoret that he left in the Kodesh HaKodeshim and bring it out. Just for that, he goes back in. And then he switches back into the golden garments and he finishes off the service for the day, the afternoon service and so on. So this is the order of the Avodah. But there's so many questions. One of my questions that I want to throw out there, in addition to just the complexity of it and why does it have to be like this, but now you kind of see how it goes, so you have a more bird's eye view of how it goes. So when you're reading it, you might not get as lost if you remember these building blocks here. Okay? One of the things that really always bothered me about the Avodah, in addition to just the strangeness of it, is, and the seeming disorganization of it, is there are two korbanot brought for the Am, for the people. One is the Sa'ir La'azazel. What is the Sa'ir La'azazel mechaper for? Does anybody know what the Sa'ir La'azazel, the one that goes over the cliff? Does anybody know what Averot that covers for? What's the Rambam saying? Hilchot Teshuvah, it's the first chapter, everybody must know it. What is it? What is it? It's mechaper al kol Averot. It's mechaper on everything. The Sa'ir La'azazel covers everything. Yeah. So, and does anybody happen to know, does anybody learn Masechet Shavuot, by the way? You ever learn Masechet Shavuot? No? Does anybody know what the Sa'ir that goes into the Sa'ir Lashem is mechaper for?
Kalot.
It's mechaper for Tumat Mikdash V'Kodashav. It's specifically mechaper for violations of the sanctity of the Beit HaMikdash. We know people go in, they're not prepared, they don't have the right kavanah, they're not pure, they're not whatever. There's all kinds of violations and unmeaning ones or unwitting ones, but all kinds of violations of the sanctity of the. It would be like if every year we had to do this because people talk in synagogue or they don't have proper kavanah or they do things they shouldn't be doing in there, and so we want to be mechaper for that. So my question is very simple. I have a very pashut question, simplistic question. If the Sa'ir La'azazel, think of a Venn diagram, right? The Sa'ir La'azazel includes everything. So what is left for the Sa'ir doesn't everything include violating the sanctity of the Beit HaMikdash? Everything includes that, right? It's everything. So why do you need two goats? That's just a very basic question to ask, right? There's a lot more that can be asked. It's a very unusual service. The whole going into the Kodesh HaKodashim, interspersed with all this blood throwing. It's like the combination between a religious kind of a movie and maybe like a horror movie. Like there's all blood being splattered everywhere. What's happening in this avodah? It's very unusual. So I think in order to understand that, I just want to give a basic approach to it. We're not going to be able to exhaust all the details of what the meaning is of the Yom Kippur Avodah, but I think that we can get the fundamentals to the point that we'll really be able to appreciate it instead of it just being a reading about some archaic set of rituals that has no meaning. And a lot of times people just read it and people totally lose focus and they don't appreciate what they're reading and don't understand it. Yes?
Can they attach something to the Azazel's head, and if it turns white?
Right.
But if the other one is dead already, what? So you attach two strings, one to the Azazel's.
The one that's dead already doesn't get a string.
Why? So
when you push the goat Azazel, you tie. They used to tie a string at the Beit HaMikdash also. In other words, what they used to do was they would tie a string to the goat, and they would tie a string at the Beit HaMikdash, and it would turn white. But then they didn't want to do that because it didn't always turn white, and the people were really, really sad. So instead, they made it later that the Kohen, that the guy who brings the Sa'ir would actually tie a string by the rock where he was pushing the goat, so only he would know. So he didn't have to say anything if things didn't go.
Who and where is the vidui on the Seir Mishalech taking place?
In the Azara still. The Kohen Gadol is doing it before it's sent out. So yes.
No, please answer.
Before it's sent out. Yeah, I did.
Azazel?
Yeah.
Because I think I remember is a demon.
Well, there's a whole discussion about what the etymology of the term Azazel is. It's not understood that way, and in the traditional rabbinic understanding is not like that. There are some midrashim that talk about the Satan as a figure in Yom Kippur, which we'll get to in a second. But generally, the way that the simple readers of the text look at it is that it means it's a reference to going to oblivion, basically. He's going into to destruction. That's where he's going. Like today, when they use the term in modern Hebrew, they're not specifying a particular destination that they have in mind. They just want to get rid of you. So it has to do with going to a place which is a place of oblivion. It could mean hard rock. It could mean a cliff. It could mean there could be any number of etymologies for the word. The point is, it's not going to be a korban. But is it? Isn't it also being a source of kapara? So how is it not a korban? I mean, it sort of is. So we have to understand that. There's a lot of unusual things here. Why all of a sudden are we using the name of Hashem? Why are we reusing it so many times? Why is that important? Why is going in the Kodesh HaKodashim important? Why are all of these elements, why all of a sudden do we have a korban that's not being offered but being thrown off a cliff? I mean, where do we ever find that? We never find anything like that. So I would like to suggest an approach to Avodat Yom Kippurim that I think ties together the key elements of it so that we can go into reciting and reading it with at least a framework for deriving some meaning from it. And the key principle here, the key point to understand is that Yom Kippur, the focus on Yom Kippur, the emphasis is on the transcendence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the key point in Yom Kippur. It's the transcendence of Hashem. And the Yud Kei Vav Kei name, the reason why we never use it is because it reflects the essence of God, which is something that we can't touch, we can't comprehend, we can't fathom, and to show the distance that we feel from any kind of comprehension of what that name really means, we never use it. Precisely because we recognize that it's beyond our understanding, it's beyond our ability to grasp. So the idea on Yom Kippur is that we are emphasizing the transcendence of Hashem. And you see that in the tefillot also. All of the introductions to Kiddusha that are all elaborate about the malachim, about all of these things, that's what they're trying to drive home. And the ultimate expression of the transcendence of Hashem, if you will, is the Kodesh HaKodashim. The Kodesh HaKodashim that's never entered. The Kodesh HaKodashim that when we do enter it, we fill it with a cloud. What does a cloud represent? The Shekhinah, whenever Hashem manifests himself to Aaron, to Moshe, there's always a cloud. Vayired Hashem be'anan, vayityatzeh v'mosham. Why is always a cloud? Because a cloud means I'm manifesting myself to you, but you don't know the real me. You don't know the real me, you can't perceive the real me. It's beyond your ability to comprehend. So even when entry to the Kodesh HaKodashim happens, it happens with a cloud, under the cover of a cloud. We actually simulate it. We create the cloud in order to represent that idea that we recognize that the ultimate understanding of Hashem is beyond our ability. And that's even what Shlomo HaMelech said. Vashem amar lishkon ba'arafel. You have decided to dwell in arafel, in the thick cloud. In other words, you're beyond our ability to fathom. And if you have that idea in mind, okay, there are really two different types of chet that a person does. There are two different types of sins that we can do. One type of sin, which is the primary focus really of Yom Kippur, and that's why Yom Kippur opens with Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aharon, that it references the deaths of the Bnei Aharon, is we overestimate how close we are to Hashem. That's one kind of chet. That's the religious person's typical chet. The person who's on the path to come close to Hashem, but overestimates how close they are. Like Nadav and Avihu. They felt entitled to innovate their own service because they had such religious ecstasy at that moment. They felt so close to God that they determined that they had the right to bring something that wasn't commanded in order to draw even closer. So there's a sense of boundaries that need to be established. And emphasizing the transcendence of Hashem is also putting us in our place. Is also saying that all of your assumptions about how close you are to God are really very much an illusion. Because He's so distant from you.
Sorry, what does transcendence
means above you. Above. How purely spiritual God is versus us being 1% spiritual and 99% whatever it is that we are. Hashem is purely. So our ability to relate to Him is always through, like the Rambam says, a masach. It's through a type of a veil. It's through a type of... They're all different misachim. There's all different blockages or veils in between us and Hashem because of our material, because we're physical. We're physical creatures. We're human creatures. So on Yom Kippur, we are emphasizing that idea. And on Yom Kippur, what is the kapara of that sa'ir that goes into the Kodesh HaKodashim? The kapara is on violating the sanctity of the Beit HaMikdash. Why does somebody violate the sanctity of the Beit HaMikdash? Because they feel that they're very hunky-dory. Everything is cool between me and God. I walk in the way that I want. When a person comes in, we can only use it as an analogy because there's no way that our synagogue is similar to the Beit HaMikdash. But to use an analogy, a person walks into the synagogue and they feel very at home. They're relaxing, they're schmoozing, they're joking around with their friends because they feel very comfortable in the house of God, right? They feel very comfortable. They feel very at home. So the idea on Yom Kippur is to recognize just how beyond us Hashem is, in a way. And to put our service of Hashem in perspective. That we shouldn't be overestimating the quality of our service of Hashem. That we have to constantly be mechaper for the service of Hashem. We have to constantly purify the Beit HaMikdash from ourselves. As if we're, so to speak, contaminating it, because it could be this pure, beautiful, perfect service. But we, because of our human nature, are of course getting involved and messing things up, as we always do. So the idea of everything that happens in the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodeshim is asking ourselves, how pure is my Avodat? I might be very machmir on every halacha, but how really close am I to God ultimately? It makes you feel very close to God to be super religious. If you put on 15 different pairs of tefillin, and all those things that people do, 17 pairs of tzitzit, all of the things that people do to make themselves feel closer to God, but really they're creating somewhat of an illusion that is a substitute for genuine closeness to God, which is something very remote, something that Moshe Rabbeinu experienced, something that a Navi experiences, and that's really why it happens in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And the cloud, because it's representing Nivu'ah. That's how Hashem revealed Himself in Nivu'ah to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Aharon, to all of these great people. It was in a cloud. That is the ultimate experience of closeness to Hashem. That's very remote from us. Okay? So now let's get back for a second to what happens before the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now we can see that the going into the Kodesh HaKodeshim is, in a way, to remind us of that encounter between man and God, if you will, between human being and God. And how shrouded in mystery it is, because we overestimate how close and how familiar we are with God. Now what happens is, and this is what differentiates Judaism from all other religions. All other religions. Because what does every other religion do? It tries to create a God that's very similar to you. It tries to create a God who's a person, or who has a human personality, or who's very angry and aggressive and likes to behead people. Or whatever it is, they try to create a God in their image that is easy to relate to, that we can feel very comfortable and very connected to. I knew a lady who used to live across the street from me when I was a kid, very nice lady, Catholic. She had a picture of you-know-who in her cabinet, and when she was lonely, she would open it and have a conversation with him, That's the feeling of familiarity. And I've told you the story about the Jehovah's Witnesses, that they used to come to my house every other Shabbat. And they told me, why do you Jews, you don't use the name of God? What's wrong with you don't use the name of God? He's your friend, He's your protector, you're close to God, what's wrong? And I said to them, do you use your father's first name when you talk to Him? They said, no, of course not. I said, then how can I use God's first name when I talk to Him? Don't you have a sense of respect, So there has to be some boundary. There's a boundary between a parent and child. Okay, we might be very close, but there's a boundary. You're my father and I'm a child. There's certain things you don't cross, even with a really chummy, relationship. And the same thing is certainly kal v'chomer a million times more so with Hashem. So this is what all of those kaparot are for. What happens before them is the vidui. All of the viduyim. What is the objective of all of those viduyim? The objective of all of them is what does vidui represent? Think back to the Rambam again. We just learned this, some of the girls that were with me. What is the vidui? What is it the end of? What process is ended in vidui? Don't whisper. Teshuvah. Teshuvah is the conclusion of Teshuvah is vidui. And when you say to Hashem, I've made these mistakes and now please forgive me. So what is the person doing when they do vidui? They're going from a state when they are far away from Hashem, so to speak, and obviously that's not a physical location, but where they are spiritually, mentally distant from God, and they are returning to Hashem. V'shavta ad Hashem Elohecha. You return to Hashem when you do teshuvah. What does teshuvah mean? It doesn't mean return to a physical place. It doesn't mean return to the way things used to be. It means return to Hashem. V'shavta ad Hashem Elohecha. So returning to Hashem is what vidui is about. Returning from a state of confusion, from a state of bad priorities, from a state of averah, from a state of sinning, to a state of lifnei Hashem. Lifnei Hashem is, that's what the Rambam says, Lashuv lifnei Hashem. A person returns lifnei Hashem. And what is the catchphrase of Yom Kippur that we like to repeat? Lifnei Hashem titaru. Once you are before Hashem, now you could be purified. In other words, what we're doing in those vidui, what the Kohen is first doing for himself, and then he does for all of the Kohanim. What he's doing in all of those times that he's mentioning the name of Hashem, and when he designates that Sa'ir L'Hashem, what he's doing in mentioning the name of Hashem again and again, and in doing all of these confessions is, he's creating within the Jewish people a state of Lifnei Hashem. Why? Because once they're Lifnei Hashem, now the cloud can come. Now you can have an encounter, but when the Jewish people are on that level, now that they've reached that level of teshuvah, they've demonstrated their teshuvah, they're standing before God, now their emissary, the Kohen Gadol, can enter into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and can have the encounter with Hashem. What happens between Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem after the sin of the golden calf? He prays to God, he asks him for forgiveness, he tries to work out a deal. Finally, when he seals the deal and Hashem appears to him in the cloud, Vayered Hashem be'anan, what does he immediately say? V'salachta la'avonenu ulchatatenu unchaltanu. Immediately after the cloud appears, he says, now forgive them. What do we do immediately after the cloud appears? We start tossing blood around. Right? Which was the way that they did that back. In other words, that was the physical expression of Kritat Brit, basically. We are making a new covenant with Hashem. We're renewing the relationship with Hashem. How do you renew the relationship with Hashem? You remove all distractions. You remove everything that holds you back from standing before Hashem. You're as fully standing before Hashem as possible. And you recreate that moment of encounter by the Kohen Gadol going in and bringing the Ketoret, representing the Shekhinah, representing Hashem, manifesting Himself to us. And at that moment, we bring the blood for Kritat Brit, for making a covenant again with Hashem, showing our dedication to Hashem again. With this newfound clarity that we have, this new encounter with Hashem that we're able to have every year, enables us to rekindle, re-establish the relationship. That's what Yom Kippur is about, isn't it? It's about returning to God after a year of being distracted by other things, having that encounter with Hashem that we want to have, and then, after that encounter takes place, we are renewing our dedication once again to living on that level, to trying to maintain that as much as possible, to dedicating ourselves to a higher and better way of life. That's the idea of splashing the blood. The blood that comes from the Kohanim, and the blood that comes from the Jews. But then we have to understand another thing, which is, wait a second. Why is it that in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, it's 1 up, 7 down? And in the Parochet, it's 1 up and it's 7 down? And you have the Par and the Sa'ir separate. They're separate. But when it goes on the golden altar, you combine them together, and there's no 1 up and 7 down anymore. What happened to the one achat v'achat achat? It's fun to repeat achat v'achat achat. Why doesn't anyone want to do that anymore? What does it symbolize? The achat v'achat achat. What's achat? What's Sheva? Sheva is Briat Ha'olam. Shiva, it's the 7 days of creation, always 7. What's the achat lemala? It's Hashem. Achad lemala v'shev lamata is saying Hashem is above and everything down here is distinct from that. Because what's the whole idea of Yom Kippur? Showing the distinctness of Hashem. Showing, like I said, the transcendence of Hashem, the Kedusha of Hashem. You could use that term. Would be a correct term. That's what it's all about. How do you show the Kedusha of Hashem? Hashem and the world are distinct. Achad lemala v'shev lamata. Where does that find its expression? In the Kodesh HaKodeshim for sure, because the Kodesh HaKodeshim is pure spirituality. It's pure spirituality because all it is the Aron and the Luchot that represent Nivu'ah. They represent the divine manifestation to the Jewish people, the revelation to the Jewish people, pure spirituality. That is what we would call, in the Rambam's terminology or in the Gemara Masechet Chagiga, Ma'aseh Merkava. That's really what it represents. The ultimate in pure spirituality, unfiltered spirituality. What is the Kodesh? One step below that. The Kodesh, one step below that, actually represents this world. Maaseh Bereshit. It represents this world. That's why you have the menorah. What's the menorah? How many branches does the menorah have? It has 7. The Shulchan represents the Parnassah that comes from Hashem. Okay? The Ketoret really represents Hashem's wisdom and chokhmah and the Torah that comes to us, that guides us, that enables us to live a life of Torah. But within this world, everything is gold in the Kodesh. But it represents a golden this world. Okay? So that's why when you're standing at the Parochet, you're actually standing at the gateway from this world and the purely spiritual world. When he comes out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim and he's facing the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he's facing that curtain, that is the gateway from this world to the world of Nivu'ah, the world of purely spiritual encounter, the world of prophecy, the world of Olam Haba. Okay? And so again, he sprinkles Achat Lemala, V'Sheva Lemata. Because there's the distinction between this world and the spiritual framework. But then when he goes to the Mizbeach, the one that the golden Mizbeach, what does he do? The 4 corners. What does the 4 corners represent in Tanakh? Huh? The 4 corners of the world, which we know is not really square, but it's a manner of speaking, right? We still use that term, even in we still say the 4 corners of the earth. Even now.
Therefore, he said he doesn't sprinkle 4 sides. He sprinkles only.
He stands in one place and he does this.
Yeah, he does all
right,
side by side.
all around, and then he puts in the middle 7 times.
So he did it both sides. He does it 4.
He does 4 corners.
The corner that he sprinkles,
he goes around to the 4 corners. He reaches over.
Which way he goes first?
He stands in the southwest corner, and he reaches and then he does the one close to him. So and then he does the top. But there he just does 7. There's no achat lemala v'sheva lamata. Why? Because when you're dealing with that mizbeach, you're dealing with this world now. And that's why when you're looking at the gateway to the purely spiritual, we don't combine the blood of the Kohanim and the regular people. Because that's something that really is not something that everybody's equal in. Not everybody can achieve that, can partake of that equally. That's something where someone who is a Kohen, somebody who's more devoted to God, whose life is more geared towards this upper echelon of spirituality, is going to reach it, and other people are not going to reach it. The Rambam said you have the greatest Chachamim, most of them never touched it. We talked about it. Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues, out of the 4 greatest Chachamim in the world, only one made it through. Only one. So what does that show you? That shows you that it's for the elite. So it makes sense that the Kohanim would have one application and everybody else has another application. But when it comes to this world, the world that can be perfected by Torah, not getting into Maaseh Merkava, not getting into the ultimate speculative secrets of the Torah, just getting into making this world a perfect place by observing the Torah in this world, and the mitzvot in this world, and the halachot in this world, there we know that everybody's equal. Everybody can do it. The Rambam says the Torah is equal for everyone. Ish v'isha, balev katzar, balev rachav, he says. Whether the person is limited in their understanding, expansive understanding, high, low, it doesn't matter. Everybody can have the Torah. Man, woman, child, everyone. So since we're all equal in that, everybody is combined in that. You see, this is the idea of recalibrating our sense of Avodat Hashem. We focus on the transcendence of Hashem, and then we say we are dedicating ourselves to a service of God that's going to be closer to the truth of Kiddushat Hashem. That's what we're going to try to do. We're pushing the reset button on all of our service of Hashem for this year, and getting it back on track by throwing the blood represents rededicating ourselves to a higher recognition of Hashem. When you feel that on Yom Kippur, that, oh my gosh, wow. On Yom Kippur, you never are more in touch with reality than on Yom Kippur. When you're standing in Tefillah on Yom Kippur, there's no distraction. You make every promise to God that you're going to be better. You see things so clearly. All of the things that are petty and silly and distract us seems so stupid on Yom Kippur. Everything is so obvious and clear on Yom Kippur. And somehow, only an hour later, we completely forget it. But as long as we have that sense of Yom Kippur, When we're standing there in Yom Kippur, it's so clear. And we make a commitment and we dedicate ourselves. We're going to live by this new understanding. We know we're going to slide back somewhat. But we're going to make an effort to do it. And that's what the throwing of the blood is supposed to represent. So then what happens to the Sa'ir La'azazel? What about that poor Sa'ir? How does he fit in? How does he fit into this picture? Because that's a person who's not trying to serve Hashem. In other words, there's two types of sins a person can do. One is that we are serving God and we are overestimating how close we are to God. But there's a very different type of thing, which is the person who abandons God. The Sa'ir La'azazel turns his back on God, literally, and walks out of the... he's not in the Chatzer of the Beit HaMikdash trying to get into the Kodesh and then ultimately to the Kodesh HaKodeshim. He's not on that trajectory trying to reach the highest spirituality. He's going towards the fantasies of Olam Hazeh. He's going towards at least Nadav and Avihu, who made a mistake and they overstepped the bounds. They were trying to get to the right destination, and they messed up. But some people, most people today, are not even doing that. They're running in the opposite direction. And the Sa'ir La'azazel, that's why you need two types of kapara. You need a kapara for even the ways in which we're trying to approach Hashem need refinement. They need constant refinement and purification. And then there's a whole other part of us that's running away from God all the time. That's disconnected from God. And that part, the korban is trying to show you, it doesn't become a korban. There's no kapara. It's not part of the service of Yom Kippur. Because what is Hashem showing you? By taking that sa'ir that represents overstepping the bounds of Kiddusha, overstepping the bounds of the Beit HaMikdash, making that into a korban, what does that show you? You should take that drive that's driving you, pushing you to be closer to Hashem, and you use it. You use it for good. Of course it's a good thing. It's a good thing that Nadav and Avihu want to be close to God. They just have to subordinate that drive to the Torah. It's a good thing that Korach wants to be a Kohen. He wants to serve God. It's just that he's not following the proper channels to serve God. So, on the other hand, so that Sa'ir becomes a Korban. It becomes part of the solution. That drive to come closer to God. Whereas the Sa'ir La'azazel is not part of the solution. The Sa'ir La'azazel is going in the other direction. And the idea that we designate somebody the day before who's going to take that Sa'ir and push him over the cliff is saying to you, it's inevitable. If you follow that path, you're going to be finished. You're going to be gone. You're not going to be a martyr in the name of God. You're just going to be falling off a cliff without even knowing. A person who lives a lifestyle of wild abandon, that's where they end up. They think they have freedom and that they're living a lifestyle of wild abandon, but it's actually all predetermined where they're going to end up. That's what they don't realize. They're just going to be a statistic. They're going to become a statistic. And that's the idea of the Sa'ir La'azazel. We can only recognize that when we first stood in the presence of Hashem. When you stand in the presence of Hashem and you realize the ultimate reality and where we should be and where we're falling short and what direction we should be facing, now you can see very clearly what the other direction is leading to and where it's going. And that's the last vidui of the Kohen Gadol. The last vidui, the last confession, and he dispatches it. And then what does he do after that? He reads the Torah. Because how can we really grow? We know that we're pulled in two directions. One direction is over a cliff. We don't want to go there. The other direction is towards Hashem. We do want to go there. We just want to go there the proper way, with the right steps, with the right progression. So what's going to teach us to do that? It's the Torah. And that's why the Kohen Gadol all of a sudden takes out a Sefer Torah. And he starts reading from it. To tell you, this is really the key. This is the way, this is the path that's going to lead us where we want to get. So finally, just to answer the one last question that we had left open, there are a few more, but it's getting late. One last question that we had left open was, why does he change in order to go get the fire pan out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim? It's a strange thing to completely change back into his clothes, white clothes again, just to go back in. What's the reason for that? We can understand why, by the way, the par and the sa'ir, why does he say a confession on his bowl, then go and designate the sa'ir, then come back and say a confession on his bowl again? Because that's a way of tying those two together. He's showing you that they're really part of one process. the Kohanim get a kapara, and because the Kohanim are going in the right direction, and the Kohanim have the right ideas, and the Kohanim, in other words, the spiritual leaders, the Kohanim understand and are correcting themselves and are following the proper path. Because of them, the rest of the people will also be able to do it. They're relying on the Kohanim. That's why the two are connected. But why does he have to go back in to get the machta all over again? What's the reason why he has to start all over again to go retrieve the fire pan? Because this is again a part of the avodah itself, is to show you that those moments of clarity are temporary. In other words, if you would leave the fire pan in, they last a while. It has to be there as long as the avodah is going on. Because it's in the context of that clarity and that revelation of Hashem's presence that we're doing all this service. But to take it away is to say, it's going to dissipate. It's not going to be, we are human beings. So even at our highest moment, we realize it's going to be short-lived. If on Yom Kippur we say, I reached the level of a malach now on Yom Kippur. I'm never going to backslide again. The rest of my life I'm going to be like this, angelic like this. If we think that, then we're committing the same transgression for which all of those sacrifices are coming to atone in the first place, which is we're being unrealistic again about who we really are. We have to recognize we are part angel and part animal. The part animal goes over a cliff. The part angel is trying to draw close to God, but sometimes it's overzealous. We need to find our place somewhere in the middle. Be realistic about where we stand before Hashem and who we truly are. And when we're able to do that and accomplish that, we've been able to really internalize the lessons and the ideas of Yom Kippur. So I know there's a lot of details to digest here, but I wanted to give some framework that could help us appreciate what this whole complicated service is trying to accomplish. And I guess if I could summarize it in a few words, the summary is we are trying to cleanse ourselves, push the reset button on our lives every year on Yom Kippur. And the way we do that is by an encounter with Hashem. A pure, an immersion in this encounter with Hashem. And this encounter with Hashem reminds us, first of all, of the shortcomings of our own service of Hashem that need to be rectified, need to be corrected, need to be reconsidered and purified, and hopefully get us back on track. And also this encounter with Hashem helps us to recognize those parts of our lives that are going in a totally different direction, that are leading us where the Sa'ir La'azazel is headed, and to try to extricate ourselves from that. But all the while realizing that this epiphany moment of Yom Kippur, this moment where we see the cloud and we suddenly want to rededicate ourselves to this highest level of service of Hashem, is itself something that by our very nature we're not going to be able to live on this level forever. By our very nature, we're going to slip back into a more humdrum existence after Yom Kippur. And what we hope is that this push of resetting, this little spurt of inspiration, will rub off on us so that we carry, at the very least, some of it with us into the coming year. And that's in essence how I understand the Avodah. Now I haven't touched on every detail. I haven't been able to mention every point, but hopefully this gives you some concept of what it's about. Did you have any questions, or I confused you enough? Yes.
Can you please elaborate a little bit on what you mean by it being a sin, or one of two sins, to overestimate your relationship with Hashem? Because to me, a big part of being Jewish is to grow closer and to sort of go in that direction.
Yeah. So it's not that a person isn't growing closer to Hashem. That's really important, but it's what happens is sometimes we underestimate. Maybe a better way to put it is we underestimate Hashem. In other words, we think it's easier to be close to Hashem than it is, and we have to recognize there's a huge gulf separating any one of us and, let's say, Moshe Rabbeinu. A gulf that's so wide that we ourselves tend to underestimate how wide it is, and think that we're very close to Hashem by doing from our simplistic avodah of Hashem, our simplistic service of God, to an ultimate service of God that Moshe Rabbeinu would do, is like night and day. Now that doesn't mean that we can't, in small increments, come closer and closer, but we have to realize it's going to be in small increments. Just like if a person sees, this is a silly, mundane example. Let's say he sees Yitzhak Perlman, playing the violin. And he just started taking violin lessons, a few weeks ago. And he's like, oh, in a few more weeks, I'm going to be playing like that. I'm going to be able to do that. That's not going to happen, for many reasons. But one of the reasons being that he just started out. Now, it might be amazing that he can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star without making a mistake. Okay, for him, that's a huge, does anybody here play any instrument? No? That might be a huge, accomplishment for that new player, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to mistake that for being, a world-class musician. And so that's what we need to use that sort of analogy, but we have to look at it the same way. We're really just tinkering with a very small baby instrument, and shouldn't confuse that with what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing. We have to always realize where we are. The humility of it is the important thing. Yes?
I know there is many new aspects to this whole Avodat.
Yeah.
One thing that I don't digest well is the factor of chance of when he chooses to go.
Okay.
Because I never see it in Judaism, the whole
Right.
lottery. Does that happen in other places?
No, it's the only place, and it has to be done that way. Okay, so the reason why it's done in that way, one of the explanations that's given is that what a person's natural inclination is, in other words, what we are dealt in life, is not under our control. All that's under our control is what we do with it. So it's not literally chance, neither is the choosing of Se'ir L'Azazel and Se'ir L'Hashem. I mean, it's not really chance. Everything ultimately Hashem knows in advance and is somehow planned. But in our lives, what we are dealt is, let's say, out of the pool of DNA that ended up creating us, from our perspective, it's like a lottery. Our parents get together and they don't know what's going to come out from their union, and it ends up being us. So we're dealt a whole bunch of different factors. Some might pull us towards the direction of the Se'ir L'Azazel. Some might pull us towards a more the direction of Hashem. We don't know like Esav and Yaakov. Right? Yaakov was born with a natural inclination to be holier. Esav was born with a natural inclination to be more animalistic. That's why it says even in the womb they were fighting, right? That doesn't mean that Esav couldn't make better choices, or that Yaakov could have made worse choices. It could have gone either way. But the idea is that what we're dealt is by chance from our perspective. In other words, we're dealt it. It's not something that we choose consciously. How life is going to be there for us. How we're going to find life is going to be out of our control. Now, obviously, the Seirim are not people, so they can't say, well, actually, I'd really like to be the other one, if you don't mind. They can't make the choice. They're representing two different kinds of people who are dealt two different lots in life.
They both end up dying.
Yeah. They both end up dying, but one of them ends up becoming a korban that actually brings something positive, is seen to bring something positive, and so in other words, that inclination and drive to come close to God can be, sublimated into something really beautiful and amazing. Whereas the wild abandon of the Se'ir L'Azazel is, by its definition, leading him in a totally different direction. A person who has a she'ifah, they call it, they really yearn for closeness to God, they need to take it in stride. Like people, they become too religious too fast. It's unhealthy for them. It's better that they take that energy and they take it in stride and build up to it so that they actually have a solid foundation in their relationship with Hashem. And that's what Hashem is saying to us. Even those of us who might be already religious, we're all growing in some way. Hashem is saying, don't rush ahead. Recognize where you really are. Like if I see a person that they're learning, Daf Yomi, but they don't even never read the Chumash before. I would say to them, maybe you need to realize where you are. That's not where you are. You're somewhere, you have to start at the right place for yourself and graduate to that. Doing Talmud is amazing, but you have to be up to it. Being Moshe, having Nivuah is amazing, but not everybody is Moshe Rabbeinu. And so that doesn't mean you can't get there. You could get there. But the guarantee that you won't get there is if you think you're already there. If you think you're already there, you'll never get there. That's why it says about Moshe Rabbeinu in Masechet Berachot, it says that the first time that Hashem appears to Moshe, what did he do? Vayaster Moshe panav. Moshe covered his face because he didn't want to look at the Mareh Nevuah, what does it say? One opinion, which ends up being the one that's most often quoted, is that because of the zechut that he didn't look, later on, Hashem El Rachum V'Chanun, later on he gets the revelation of the Darchei Hashem. Because he was humble at that stage and said, I don't want to rush ahead of where I am. So therefore he had the zechut that he was able to climb up to the highest levels. And that's what Yom Kippur is telling us. Recognize where we are, so each person can take a step that's realistic and most productive for themselves.